Hello and welcome to the Dumbbell Ben podcast, episode 3. I'm also known as Dumbbell Ben over on TikTok. Go ahead and give me a follow. Right now I'm just in those two social media networks. I'm probably going to add some more and we'll be starting my own podcast here soon. But right now just on those, trying to build some traction and see if there's a way that I can get this information out to people and help some people out. The Dumbbell Ben podcast reviews articles of research and helps to try and get us one step closer to the research. A lot of people will cherry pick studies, getting one-liners from any study, a conclusion or a piece of data that supports their view. I'm not about any specific view on this podcast. I do have my views and I will share those as well. But what I'm about is getting people a little bit closer to the research, and I'll do that through reviewing articles and giving them an audio link. I find a lot of people can't read the research because it just takes too long, and for me that's hard too, and that was always a problem as I tried to train people and train myself, is that it was just hard to find the time to read the research. So what I want to do is hopefully give people a link to the research through audio by reviewing these studies and interpreting some of the charts in them in a way that you couldn't do with just a text-to-speech. So today we're going over the article, Resistance Training Volume Enhances Muscle Hypertrophy, but Not Strength in Trained Men. This study is by Brad J. Schoenfeld. He's kind of a cult leader. Well, not a cult leader, but he's kind of a deity in the fitness community for the fact that he does so many studies on strength and hypertrophy. And I think that's because he's someone himself that likes to train and such, and has trained a lot of athletes in his day. So he does a lot of studies on that, and this one is kind of one of the groundbreaking research studies that he's done, as he's done many on strength training, and especially on volume. That's where some of his biggest groundbreaking studies have come from. And this one, of course, is comparing the volume of sets. So many people don't really know exactly what volume means. From a strength training perspective or resistance training perspective, volume is either calculated by sets times reps times load. So that would mean total tonnage lifted. So you might say, on Friday I lifted 3,500 pounds. That wouldn't mean you did that in one rep, although maybe you did, and you're Thor or Larry Wheels or somebody. That they still haven't done that. But well, maybe they have. Tell me. But that doesn't mean you lifted all in one rep. What it means is that over the course of your workout, you did that much weight total lifted. Now that's a little bit arbitrary because you can also go for distance. So you could do weight times reps times set times distance maneuvered through the weight if you wanted to get total workload, because obviously if you did a barbell shrug, with whatever 400 pounds and did a bunch of reps of that would quickly add up if you did weight times reps times sets to be maybe 10,000, 20,000 pounds in a single workout and still be manageable. And you wouldn't really be able to compare that equally to a set of leg press or a set of bicep curls or whatever. So what they try to do with this study, as well as in many studies, is just do sets times reps or total number of sets in a particular rep range. And so this study specifically does that last one. I believe that's a better way to compare things, because then it takes into account a little bit of the total rep range. Usually with workouts that are small rep range, you'll do more sets. No one does 5 reps of calf raises. That's just, you would probably injure yourself if you were doing a high enough stimulus, unless you're doing some sort of hypertrophy, unless you're doing some sort of speed work, explosive work, then you might do 5 reps. Otherwise, no one's doing 5 reps of calf raises. You just have to use too heavy of weight. Same thing with, bicep curls. Most people aren't doing sets of 3 for bicep curls. They're doing sets of 20 instead of 15. So that's the reason why this type of thing kind of helps take that out of the equation, because exercises that aren't as big as a range of motion, you use higher reps, and exercises that are a bigger range of motion, squat, you'll often use lower reps. 5 by 5 for squat, super common. Still not always the case. Sometimes people do high rep squats, 20, 25. But this study is trying to get a little bit more close to what we would do in our normal training. And of course, for their training, they do specifically say 8 through 12 reps for every workout. So this study is specifically set up to try and test based on how many sets of the workout you're going to do, using a specific rep range, but we're trying to get in the ballpark of how many sets you should do in general as well. So First, some background. There has already been some studies showing that even one set of a workout can cause muscle growth. And in certain studies, it even causes as much as multiple sets, both for muscle growth and strength training. The problem is that a lot of these studies were done on people that hadn't done resistance training before or that weren't active at the time. What this study is trying to do is to show if resistance trained men also have the same effect from that type of training. If they also can get gains, for lack of a better term, from one set per workout. As stated in this article, the question is there a ceiling effect? As stated in this article, a ceiling effect makes it progressively more difficult for trained lifters to increase muscle mass, thereby necessitating more demanding resistance training protocols to elicit further muscular gains. Indeed, there is emerging evidence that consistent resistance training can alter anabolic intracellular signaling, indicating an attenuating hypertrophic response. So what they're looking at here is, in resistance trained individuals, is there the ceiling effect? And if so, will more sets help break through that ceiling effect and cause more growth? Here it talks about some of the mechanisms that would be responsible for increasing muscle mass with higher set loads. One of those mechanisms is augmentation of the phosphorylation of P70S6, which of course is augmentation means increase. The increase in phosphorylation of P70S6 kinase and protein synthesis. Of course, this doesn't show muscle gain in the long term. It's rather an acute snapshot of what is happening in the muscle at any given moment. So this does suggest an increase in muscle growth over the long run, but it does not validate that that's what actually happens. And so that's why we're doing this study, is to see if the greater set loads would cause an increase in muscle growth over the course of weeks or months. So in this study, they randomly assigned the participants into 3 separate groups. A low volume training group that trained only 1 set per exercise per workout. Now this actually equated to about 2 sets per muscle group because many of the exercises work the same muscle groups. They did bench press, overhead press, right? Both working the chest, triceps, and shoulders, just to a little bit different focus on each one. The overhead press obviously is focusing most on shoulders, chest press is focusing most on chest, but both work the triceps quite a bit and both actually work chest and shoulders as well. So this actually totaled out to be about 2 sets per muscle group per workout. The groups then did 3 workouts per week. So the low volume group was about 6 sets per muscle group. The medium volume group did 3 sets per exercise per training session, and the high volume group did 5 sets per exercise per workout. So 1, 3, and 5. Now again, this translated into about 6 sets per muscle group in a low volume group, 18 sets per muscle group in the medium, and 27 sets per muscle group in the high. Again, so you're including chest press, shoulder press, that then equals about 6 in the low group, 18 in the middle, 27 in the high. And that's just an example. They did more exercises than just chest press and shoulder press, but they were compound exercises, so every muscle was worked about 2 times per workout, even in the low volume group. So that's something to keep in mind. This isn't extremely low volume. This isn't only 1 set, as some people say is the only thing you need, but very low volume in the low volume group. If you look here, it lists the exercise used. Again, you have barbell bench press, military press, wide grip lateral pull down, seated cable row, barbell back squat, these common movements that everyone uses to assess strength and a lot of people use to induce hypertrophy. It's a good thing because these people were already familiar with these movements, meaning that there was no effect of the person learning the movement, so they wouldn't have seen any huge strength gains just from learning the movement. Like if you just started a new type of pull-up, you might only be able to get a couple reps with it, even if you can rep out 15 reps on the pull-up you're used to. Within about a month or 2, you're probably going to be pretty close to that 15 or whatever new pull-up that you have, just because you need to get used to it and learn how to do the movement. So that takes away that confounding variable. They're not doing some crazy movements. And of course, they were asked to refrain from any resistance training outside of the training itself during the study, which is also good. If you move on here, of course, the study lasted 8 weeks, and they were doing an 8 to 12 repetition zone. That's a good zone, I believe, for the study because they're looking at both strength and hypertrophy. That's kind of a good zone for both. Anything between kind of a 5 to 10 is pretty dang good for strength gains. Of course, if you want to do peak strength, you want to do less than 5 reps, but just for general strength gains, 5 to 10 is pretty good. And anywhere between 5 and 30 is actually good for hypertrophy. So they're a little bit low on the hypertrophy zone, a little bit high on the strength zone, but that's a good area to get results for both. And of course, I want to see results for both here. We can have multiple different studies, one study doing a 5 rep range and one study doing a 15. That would be good in the long run, right? But this study is a good snapshot of what we're getting as far as what effect volume has for both strength and hypertrophy, because we're in that intermediate rep zone. Now, one reason why a lot of people actually don't think the study holds a lot of validity is that the sets were done to failure and then repeated after 90 seconds. So they only had 90 seconds break between each set. Now, I don't think this is actually the case, because it says specifically the load was adjusted for each exercise as needed on successive sets to ensure the subjects achieved momentary failure in the targeted repetition range. So, in other words, if they had only reached 8 reps on the set before, the participants would then decrease their weight, or rather the researchers would decrease the weight for the participants for the next set to make sure that they stayed in that 8 to 12 zone even while reaching failure. Because of course, if you do one set to 10 to true failure of any exercise, or even close to failure, you're probably not going to be able to hit 10 or maybe even 9 on the next set. And so they're trying to make sure that they're reaching this rep range. It's shown in the research that staying inside of the rep ranges is more important for hypertrophy. The only reason here that I would actually question just a little bit the effect is because for strength gains, there is a very solid threshold for the amount of force you need to produce for strength gains. If you fall out of about 85% of your maximum capacity, of your 1 rep max capacity, you're not going to making strength gains. I mean, you will very slowly in the case of building more muscle, learning the movements better, but to any large degree, you really want to stay above about 85% of your 1 rep max to do maximal strength gains and maximal strength recruitment. I wonder here if many of the subjects doing multiple sets, maybe you did 5 sets for an exercise. I wonder if many of the subjects, set 1, they maybe were at, 85%. Set 2, maybe they were at 80. Set 3, maybe they were at 75, then 60, and then 55, right? Now, 55 is even on the lighter side for hypertrophy, but you can still achieve hypertrophy pretty easily with that as long as you're pushing yourself hard enough, which these people were because they, had someone yelling at them to go harder and because they were already tired from previous sets, right? So the question here for me is, are you testing the strength side of it as good as you would the hypertrophy side? Because typically you want to wait longer for strength so you can always maintain that really high percentage of your 1 rep max. So that's one of the biggest flaws that I see with this study, but still interesting to look at. Let's look a little bit further. Some other notes about the study is they did avoid supplementation during the study. They also were asked to fill out food logs for 5 days at the beginning and end of the study. Food logs are interesting to me. I don't actually think they're very effective at all. As a personal trainer, I've seen many people not fill them out effectively at all. And that's for people that are trying to improve their body composition, whatever, right? They're reporting back to me and they're nervous sometimes to report back. They may report it back on purpose wrong because they're scared of what I'll say, but they also just report it back wrong because they're just not thinking about it, right? Now, even if you have somebody who's really, really trying to report it correctly, you may mess up. And if they do mess up, they're less likely to tell me because they're worried about what I'll say and I'll judge them or whatever, right? And that's on a continual basis with me, even when I get to know these people. So if you're going into a research study and these people are saying, hey, if you fill out this food log wrong, you might be kicked out. And maybe they don't tell you that, but you might think, I've been training for this study for 8 weeks. I don't want to be kicked out of the study. I'm going to fill out this food log pretty close to what I think they want me to eat. And, pretty good calories, pretty good macronutrients. Maybe they gave you some suggestions of what you should be eating at the beginning of the study. You're going to fill it out pretty close to how you think that they want you to fill it out because you don't want to kick out of the study at 8 weeks of work. Some people will, but I think that's a huge deterrent. And even if it wasn't, there's a lot of validity problems with food logs in general. A lot of studies use them. I actually don't care too much about the results of the dietary adherence in this one. As well as in most studies, unless you're specifically looking at that. But we'll look over it a little bit in general. They did ask them to add 24-gram protein shake after every workout. That's probably a good idea, just to help remove any variance due to somebody just not realizing they need to take enough protein. At least with the protein shake, you're getting that boost after the workout, and hopefully your overall protein will be about where it needs to be if you're getting that as well. Even people that are low on protein generally aren't crazy low, so that helps just remove those people who are a little bit low. They still get the full effect of the training. Now, of course, a little bit closer look into what they were actually measuring. They use ultrasound imaging to measure the thickness of the muscles. There actually is a pretty good correlation, they say here, between ultrasound imaging and MRI imaging, which is kind of the gold standard for showing muscle size. You can get very detailed with MRI, but ultrasound imaging is also very well correlated. They took multiple images, and they of course waited 2 days after the last training session to help let the edema and inflammation vacate the area so that the muscle measurement would not be false because of that. Now, as far as strength goes, they measured that pre and post training as well. Of course, they asked the participants to refrain from resistance training for 48 hours before each session of testing. This was to hopefully make it where they were not coming in sore or fatigued for the session, get a full accurate assessment of how much force they could produce. One interesting thing that they did is they recorded the foot and hand placement of individuals for the bench press before the study, and then used that same imaging for after the study. So what I mean by that is if you're doing a pretty close grip bench press for the initial assessment, they would keep that same hand grip for the post assessment. They actually videoed it and said, okay, your hands were 1 ring away from the knurling, we're going to keep that, and your feet were tucked under behind you, we're going to keep that. We're not going to have you do feet raised and hands far apart for the second one when neither one was the case for the first one. That's pretty big because a lot of people might change that substantially without even knowing over the course of the 8 weeks, and thus have increased their strength over the course of 8 weeks to a large degree simply from form alterations. Because, as we all know, usually a wider grip is stronger to a point. Obviously, if you go really far, it's not, but if you're using a very close grip and then a medium to wide at the end, you could have increased your bench press, 20, 30, 40 pounds just on that. So they wanted to remove that, and that was very good for them to look at. I think a lot of people would have overlooked that. Brad Schoenfeld and colleagues were able to catch that here, which is really good. Now, let's look at some of the charts here. Looking at this chart, sometimes they can be a little bit hard to understand at first, and it's partially because, some people might not be used to how charts look and how they report, but also each chart reports a little bit differently, so you got to kind of look into the research and see how they're reporting. In this one, they're using this P group to mean there was a statistical difference between the groups in the improvement seen in each body part. So that's one interesting thing. So a lot of times when they say P group, that means there's statistical significance between the groups, and often they're just talking about baseline. So the baseline size of their biceps might be bigger in one group just randomly, right? In this one, they're saying the change between the groups has a statistical significant difference. So remember that. So right here, this 0.02 means that the biceps had a statistically significant change over the course of time. They saw the same result with the rectus femoris thickness as well as the vastus lateralis thickness. Now these BF10 numbers are also statistically significant in the bicep thickness, rectus femoris thickness, and vastus lateralis thickness. BF10 is an interesting number. It's something that's not used in every study. Essentially what it is it's kind of a way to show a p-value for both the null hypothesis and the hypothesis in one number. This might be a little confusing because some people might not really get what a p-value is, but again, a p-value is the chance that your results happened randomly, right? So if you have a low p-value, that means your results are pretty credible. The B10 also takes into account how likely the opposite were to be true. So how likely is it not only that the results you got are true, but how likely is it that the null hypothesis, or in other words, the opposite results, could have also happened? Now, I'm not an expert in statistics. That's the best way I know how to explain BF10. It's kind of a hard concept to get across, but if anyone can explain it better in the comments, please feel free. And I'll make another video specifically on that if you want. But this value is actually better the higher it is, as far as it being more sure that your hypothesis was correct. So right here, anything above a 3 starts to be fairly substantial, meaning that you should really look at it as being valid or having more validity. Of course, the higher you get, the stronger your conclusions can be. So 3 might be something like we believe that's the case, or evidence points to that being the case, and things that are really high like the 8 and the 63 over here, of course, are showing strong evidence towards the fact that volume increases increase muscle size as well at a quicker rate than lower volumes. Now, these outcomes are actually looking at strength and endurance, showing that the 1 rep max of both the squat and the bench press didn't statistically increase to a greater amount with volume, as well as looking at the endurance, and that also did not statistically increase with greater volume. But of course, if you look at some of the conclusions here, they conclude for muscular strength that these findings indicate that resistance-trained individuals can markedly enhance levels of strength by performing only 39 minutes of weekly resistance training with gains equal to the achieved in a 5-fold greater time commitment. Interesting, because what they're saying is that by doing simply 1 set per exercise and at most 2 sets per muscle group for 3 workouts a week, so 6 total sets, you can achieve just as good as strength gains as if you did 27 total sets. So that means that you could be doing far more efficient workouts if you're just looking for strength. Now, other studies have shown that there is an improvement for more sets for strength training. It's probably due to practice when this happens. The effect size isn't great even in those studies. I would say that strength training volumes do allow you to train much less if you would like. The only problem is this is improving strength specifically and not looking too much at long-term muscle growth. And strength improvements without muscle growth are going to dry up fairly quickly. I don't know of many people who are my size who bench 600 pounds. It just doesn't happen. You have to gain more muscle. The other thing to look at here for strength training is that this was in the 8 to 12 rep range they were training. Of course, if you did lower reps or higher reps, some other results might come out. If you're doing strictly single rep max training, would only 1 set per exercise be enough? Some may argue it could be more because they're actually specifically working on 1 rep max, but some may argue over 8 weeks or 12 weeks or more, you actually might lose muscle if you're only doing 1 set of 1 rep. And I would think the latter would be true. For a peaking program, doing a few weeks of only 1 rep per set might work, but over the long run, it's not going to. So that's one interesting thing, is that this workout was actually not specifically targeted for strength athletes. Of course, this would be more of your auxiliary work if you were a strength athlete. Now, one last interesting thing from this study is that the endurance of the muscle was not improved by higher set volumes. That was a surprise to me. Obviously, doing higher reps per set would be a better way of increasing muscular endurance. If anyone wants to get higher muscular endurance, I'm going to recommend, burnout sets and, 30 reps for a muscle. That's, of course, if you're wanting to do, endurance as far as resistance training, endurance, build up anaerobic capacity. But I would have suspected, especially with only the 90-second rest times, that there would be some carryover as far as increasing the lactate clearance rate and things of that nature. But there wasn't, which kind of shows that it might be more of a practice thing as well as training in those rep ranges that improves your performance in those rep ranges. Which also begs to question how much more results would you get training in the rep ranges for strength. If it was a practice thing for endurance, it's probably more of a practice thing for strength. And of course, similar ideas have been tested and shown to be valid in other studies. Take homes from this one, though, is if you're looking to strictly improve strength over the course of a few weeks, you can probably get away with very low set volumes, anywhere upwards of 6 sets per week per muscle group is probably more than enough. But that's, of course, in the short term. If you want to go long-term strength gains, you will need to do hypertrophy. And, of course, you'll need to go higher sets, maybe anywhere from 10 to 20 to 30 sets has been shown to be very effective in the literature. In this study specifically, up to 27 sets was to be effective. So, of course, give it a try in your own training and let me know how it works. Let me know if you have any other studies that you want me to look into and give you some insights on my YouTube channel. Of course, I'm also uploading clips to TikTok as well as different advice on TikTok. Follow me over there at Dumbbell Ben, and I'll see you all next time.